Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will call the State of Nevada Executive Branch Audit Committee meeting to order. Mr. Lieutenant Governor and Madam Secretary, can you hear us loud and clear in Las Vegas?
Yes.
Yes, we can, Governor.
Great. We'll then move to agenda item number 2, public comment. Is there any member of the public here in Carson City that would like to provide comment to the committee? I hear and see none. Is there anyone present in Las Vegas that would like to provide public comment to the committee?
No, there's nobody here, Governor.
All right, thank you. We'll move to agenda item number 3, which is the approval of the February 22nd, 2017 Executive Branch Audit Committee meeting minutes. Have the members had an opportunity to review the minutes, and are there any changes?
I have no changes. I move for approval.
Secretary has moved to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by the Attorney General. Any questions or comments on the motion?
Governor, can you just record me as abstaining since I was not at the meeting?
Yes. All right, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously, and if you would mark the Lieutenant Governor as having abstained from the vote. Move to agenda item number 4, which is presentation of the division's audit reports pursuant to NRS 353A.085, the Department of Administration report number 17-04. Good morning.
Good morning, Governor and committee members. For the record, Lori Hoover, Executive Branch Auditor. Representing Department of Administration is Director Patrick Cates, and representing Enterprise IT Services is Chief Information Officer Shannon Ramming. At the direction of the Executive Branch Audit Committee, we performed an audit of the Enterprise IT Services, also known as EATS. This is our first of 2 planned audits. Our first audit focused on EATS technology investment request or TIRE process. Our second audit will focus on the role for EATS in IT services statewide. In our first audit, we made 4 recommendations to improve the TIRE process. First, we recommend EATS broaden the TIRE review by including subject matter experts, such as EATS section chiefs, and having IT Strategic Planning Committee meet more often to review and rank all TIREs. This ensures TIREs are reviewed for technical and program elements which might affect the agency and EATS resources and IT infrastructure. This will also guarantee TIRE objectives are aligned with the Governor's goals and priorities and linked to the agency's strategic and business plans. Second, we recommend that EATS update the statute and other guidelines related to TIREs to ensure agencies are aware of TIRE requirements. Third, we recommend that EATS formalize their TIRE policies and procedures to ensure consistency in the TIRE review process. Finally, we recommend EATS collect summary data to identify enterprise-wide opportunities to help avoid duplication of efforts and systems and determine the overall technology direction of the state. We would like to thank the Director, the CIO, and the Department and Division staff for their time and assistance during this audit, and we'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have at this time.
All right, thank you. And that's why I love this process, because I learn something new every time we do an audit. So I was curious, there's a few comments that I wanted to pull out of the presentation, one of which was that the TIRE administrator represents that he has never denied a TIRE. And that was a pretty interesting fact for me. And then I had written myself a note of how many TIRE requests have then been approved over the past, say, 4 years.
For the record, Lori Hoover, Executive Branch Auditor. When we requested the list, EATS was not currently keeping track of any interim TIREs submitted, but this formal budget process they approved about 24 tires, and the prior budget was about the same amount. I think it was just a little bit less, about 18.
And then if you could go a little deeper or in more detail with regard to subject matter experts being a part of this approval process?
For the record, Lori Hoover, Executive Branch Auditor. It's difficult for one individual to have all the expertise needed in any subject, but especially, I think, information technology. So EATS has different sections that have chiefs, and they have networking, communication, and such, and those individuals would have more knowledge and more current, up-to-date information to review the tires and ensure that those tires are going the direction that the state needs to go.
Patrick, do you have any comments with regard to, or Mr. Cates, excuse me, do you have any comments with regard to this? Because like I said, so we have one individual that takes in every tire request, and have you monetized what the amount of those tire requests are? Do you have any estimate?
For the record, Lori Hoover, no, I don't, but I can get you that information.
Mr. Cates probably knows the answer to that question, but I would imagine it's tens of millions of dollars. Mr. Cates.
For the record, Patrick Cates, I don't know the exact number, but it's certainly in the tens of millions of dollars at least. We're very thankful for the executive branch audit team and the recommendations that they've made. I think we have recognized that the process currently in place is deficient and has been for a long time. Before the Great Recession, EATS had an actual planning unit composed of several individuals. I want to say it was about half a dozen people. And the process, when they administered it, was a lot more rigorous, and there was more review. When those functions were lost as we cut budgets, it really came down to one person's part-time job to make sure that the paperwork was filed. And a lot of emphasis was placed on the IT Strategic Planning Committee ranking those projects in some priority order, which they only did once every year. I mean, once for a biennial process for budgeting. And in the interim, there's not that many projects that would be started, but they were, they would try to make sure if agencies had an IT project that they would complete the paperwork. It was strictly a way of completing paperwork and having one list of where there were IT projects being approved by the state. We don't think that's adequate. I know since I took over as director, we've talked a lot about how we solve that. And we've been engaging with ITAB, the IT Technology Advisory Board, to try to find some direction, and the recommendations that they made are exactly the direction that we want to go. Part of it is resource constrained. Since we don't have a planning unit, if we can use the division chiefs that have expertise in their areas, network being a big one. You know, if you want to have an IT project that's going to require you to use an online application out in the cloud somewhere, you're going to need enough bandwidth to be able to get to that, for example. Sometimes agencies don't consider that. We will make as many policy changes as we can make to make this system more robust. I don't want to ask for more resources to do this. There were some positions that were slated to be eliminated in the budget that are policy type positions in EATS, and the legislature retained those, and we want to help, and we want to have those positions help with this process and involve those chiefs so that we could do a more thorough review. I think there's also a little bit of a challenge in how EATS works with other agencies. There are agencies that have in statute an exemption from EATS services. And one could interpret NRS to mean that certain agencies don't need to submit tires if they have that exemption. We don't believe that, but the way the law is written, it's not clear. And you have shops, very large agencies that have big IT shops, and there's a little bit of political turf there, and who has the authority to look at their projects and who has the expertise and doesn't. We think that EATS has a critical central role in that process. We don't want to manage their projects, but we need to make sure that they're well vetted, well thought out. We can do that through policy and the recommendations made by the audit team.
Okay, obviously, I don't have to do it again, but in order to budget. I mean, and tires are always a big piece of that. My staff, we exclusively rely on a very vetted process. And so what concerns me about this, and again, that's what this audit's for, and we're going to fix this, is not a single one has ever been turned down at that level. And so it makes me question what the filtering is in terms of as these tires come up through the process. So as you said, I get that there were positions cut, but I was never aware that there was never, a group or somebody, a subject matter expert that wasn't part of this. And then the other piece of this is you have, as you said, one individual that is reviewing all of this. And we come up against this in the Board of Examiners all the time, where if that one person gets sick or decides to retire, there's nobody behind them. And so is there a plan to get some other folks trained so that not only bringing in these subject matter experts, but having somebody behind the individual who approves all these?
Good morning. For the record, Shanna Roming, Chief Information Officer. Thank you for the question. Yes, I actually have our deputy who is backing up our person who's doing the tires right now. So I've actually got a second person in there, and we also will have our subject matter experts in there. So I do have someone in there. It is a part-time job for him also, but at least we have now 2 sets of eyes, and if there's anything that looks significant, then we pull myself and all of our other SMEs into it. So thanks to this audit finding, it was great. So we are definitely putting that in place. But I do have Mr. Hawes, our deputy administrator, helping right now.
And then finally, and I leave it to some of the other members, it just astounded me that one had never been denied. And I almost feel like, is there even a vetting process if every single one has been approved, at least indefinitely, in terms of the history of this audit?
For the record, Patrick Cates, I would say while that individual has not denied a tire, they are reviewed, and sometimes they do encounter where we have issues with infrastructure or something and can't implement that, and there is communication that goes back to the agency. So I think, I know I can think of circumstances where agencies have reconsidered tires or maybe reconfigured them based on needs input. I will also say that the IT Strategic Planning Committee, that their piece, although infrequent, not frequent enough, is very important because they rank them all by priority 1 to 24, or whatever it may be. And that then really informs the budget office as they put the budget together. And a lot of those lower ranked projects didn't get into the budget. And so that's really where the vetting occurs. But we need the technical vetting. That's what we're really missing.
Mr. Controller.
Thank you, Governor. And I want to reflect on 3 things here. First of all, this is a very fine audit, and I appreciate it. But the 3 things I want to talk about are process, subject matter expertise, and security and that sort of thing. What we're doing here, if we follow this recommendation, is we're increasing the process substantially. And by the way, let me just say, as one of those agencies that's exempt from EATS's administrations for the most part, but one that has submitted tires, the State Controller's Office feels that they do get a real review. So we're thankful for that. Anyway, we're extending the process in this proposal, and that always concerns me because government, the public sector, tends to be too heavy on process. I was happy to hear Director Cates say that we think we can do this, he thinks we can do this without any additional personnel. That's the first concern about extending process. So I hope it works out that way. And please do let us know. The second concern on process, in my mind, goes to 2 things. One is the subject matter expertise, and the other is safety and security. On the subject matter expertise, I think it's a kind of a double-edged sword. There are a lot of agencies that don't have the expertise and that benefit from the tire review, and that's great. That's the benefits of the additional process. That's the benefits of the review and the additional time that it takes, which is a big concern. On the other hand, the nature of information technology is that it's metastasizing, it's developing all over the place, and even your subject matter experts can't have full knowledge of everything that's going on and everything they'd like to bring to the task. But occasionally out in the agencies working with specialized areas, some of their people can have some knowledge. So I would hope there can be a feedback so that on page 10, we're not just talking about agency-defined significant application features, but also capabilities that can be extended to other agencies. In other words, I think there should be a two-way learning process here between the agencies. And what I worry about at one level is slowing up those unique individuals who are in the agencies, who can make things happen quickly. This is what the private sector does so well, is it allows people like that to be entrepreneurial, to develop something, to move forward fast. And so I'm concerned that we understand both edges of that sword, and that we have a expeditious process when you see something new and something novel and creative, that we encourage them to go fast, because the public and the taxpayers will benefit from that, and the agencies will. I guess the reason that ultimately I'm comfortable with extending the process here is the thing we all worry about is safety and security. And I just bought a new car and found out that the way you steal new cars today, this was explained to me by the dealer and dealer's people, is you don't have a screwdriver-like implement, you don't do anything, you use an iPhone or something like that. This is representative of the kind of safety and security problems that we all face, and so I'm comforted by the safety and security aspects of the extended tire review. And with that, I'll just end there and say, again, a fine job, and I'm happy to support this.
Thank you, Mr. Controller. Any other questions from Northern Nevada? Ms. Cross.
Thank you. For the record, Trudy Cross. Thank you, Lori, for saying at the beginning that there is a follow-up audit to this one as well, because I think many questions will be answered hopefully in that audit. My biggest question is, are you guys going to look at other agencies, other governments, and see who's doing this better? I'm hoping that this is not a unique situation to Nevada, and I'm hoping there's some best practices out there, or that maybe the department is part of a professional group that you talk about these things. And because as you mentioned, there are millions of dollars at stake, and I am not against extending a process if it's going to save millions of dollars. So maybe you can help me out in what your next audit's going to cover. And
thank you. For the record, Warren Lohman. Yes, we are looking at that whole breadth of issues you've described. We've already started looking at other states. The division and the department have been very gracious and are helping in that process, making us aware of information they're aware of, initiatives in other states that they're aware of, and we are going to look at it. I'm not sure if we're going to say things are better. I'm not sure that we're not doing them as well as they can be done, but we're going to find out, and our focus will be very broad.
And are you, Director Cates, are you guys part of a professional association of IT directors or something? There has to be something, I think.
So, yes, there is. So there's a National Association of State CIOs that Shanna's a member of. There's also the National Association of State Chief Administrators that I'm a member of. And those two organizations, along with NASPO, which is the purchasing organization, they all work in conjunction. And the themes and things that they have been working on a lot lately is procurement of IT, shared services, more consolidation of shared services among states, and that has a huge IT component in it because that's where you get a lot of duplication of cost, is when individual agencies build the same type of infrastructure to do duplicative type of things. I would say that there is a lot of variation among states in how they approach this particular issue. Some states are very decentralized and others are more centralized. I think Nevada being a fairly small state, I think we can get our hands around this and at least have a central process to review these projects. As I said before, I don't think EATS wants to be in the business of managing every agency's IT project, but just making sure that it's set to certain standards, architectural standards, cybersecurity standards. And I think the way that we address concerns that we don't want it to bog down in additional process is to have some very clear criteria internally for what technical things have to be looked at and what those standards are, so that a division chief in EATS can go check, 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 or not, and have a dialogue with the agency to get them where they need to be. So that's my hope.
Last question. On your recommendation for subject matter experts, would you see those as being staff hired by the agency or contractors on an as-needed basis?
No, we see again, Warren Lohman for the record, we see those as existing staff managers that are there in the agency now.
Thank you.
Mr. Attorney General.
I would just ask, is there an explanation for why 100% of these have been approved over the last few years?
For the record, Patrick Cates. As I said, that comment relates to the one individual who's collecting the paperwork. That individual is not rejected a tire. But what they have done is work with agencies to improve the tire, to beef it up, make sure it's addressing the things it needs to address. And I'm not even sure, well, this predates me, but I'm not even sure in the days when they had a planning group if that group actually said this is denied or not. They would just work with agencies to beef it up. Not unlike, I think of it as like the CIP process that we go through, where agencies come forward with projects that they want to do, and the Public Works Board's technical staff work with them in developing good cost estimates. And even then, the staff doesn't say, this isn't going to be approved. They put it out there, they let the board decide, and make priorities about what projects should go forward and what kind of rank. And then ultimately, that goes to the budget office, goes to the governor. Similarly, tires, it's the IT Strategic Planning Committee that ranks those projects. And although they don't formally deny any, their ranking informs the budget office, so that maybe out of those 24, you might have 15 that actually get approved, if that makes sense. So it's not really the staff that's denying it, it's more of the vetting process between the committee and the governor's office.
Yeah, I guess more what I was asking is, let's say my agency, we have IT money, we send something over, we have the money, of course we'd like it approved. I'm sort of trying to give the other way that you guys have not necessarily done anything wrong, that money's budgeted, agencies have it, and they laid out good plans. I just want to know whether the role is to say yes or no, or whether it's more to steer that it's proper within the larger system. That's, I guess, what I'm getting at.
Right.
Which I think is good for the whole group to figure out what the role is, whether you guys are supposed to be a gatekeeper of the spending or whether it's a different role.
For the record, Patrick Cates, I don't see EAT's role as being the gatekeeper of the spending. I think their role is to make sure that the justifications for the project, the business case for that project, the technical needs for that project have been well articulated. I think that's EAT's staff role. I think it's the IT Strategic Planning Committee that then needs to review those final projects and make recommendations as to whether projects go forward or not. I think the IT Strategic Planning Committee needs a more robust role Currently, they meet once every 2 years as part of the budget process. And through policy, I would like to see them meet more regularly, review progress on projects, and just be a little more involved. And I think that is where the proper authority should lie. Well, ultimately, proper authority lies with the budget office and the governor's office, but I think that's where that decision-making should occur.
No, thank you, Mr. Cates, because I don't want the wrong impression to be on the record that there's this one individual in the entire state of Nevada who is approving these multi-million-dollar technology requests, and perhaps something that wasn't necessary got through. I mean, there is a very strict vetting process, as you discussed, to make sure that when they do get to Mr. Wells and in the budget office and ultimately to the governor's office for final approval and inclusion in the budget, that there have been several eyes on these specific projects with expertise to determine, you know, the needs of the state. As I said, and what you've talked about is going to improve that process to have those subject matter experts at the earliest point possible. And, you know, finally, I guess redundant of what the Attorney General just stated was that that you have, although there have been none that have been rejected, it is because they've been fixed. If there was a problem, they get sent back and they go through that process in terms of determining what the best technology is for the best price, and are we really getting what we need or wanted. And so anyway, I just want to make sure that's in the minutes. So for future eyes to look at. If they were just to look at this, they might have the wrong impression. Mr. Lieutenant Governor, Madam Secretary, any questions or comments?
Thank you, Governor. I just wanted to thank Mr. Katz and his Gates and his team from the Secretary of State's office, and I've got staff up there in the audience today that I think will collaborate with me on this, but we are very happy with the process of what you've been doing for us, because we have asked for the expertise and the help, not only from that division, but also Mr. Wells and his team have been very, very good to work with. We're not perfect in what we see or what we're doing, and we need guidance, and they've been very good for us to work with. So I just wanted to put that on the record, because we have a lot of programs, and this time we actually had some money left over, and the legislature more than willingly took that and put it someplace else. But we are scrutinized, I think, in a lot of ways in our different agencies, where we're looked at through multiple lenses. And so I just wanted to put that on the record. My staff can confirm or deny if I know what in the world I'm talking about, but I have to tell you, just from our experience, it's been good with all of the divisions under you, Governor. We feel like they've got it. I think this audit is wonderful because you've been able to find a few areas where you can improve the technique and what's going on. And right now in our technology world, what's going on with us, I think that's very, very important for us to keep looking at how can we improve what we can do. I know that the one big program that my Chief Deputy, Scott Anderson, that they worked on this time took a long time, over a year, for them to put it together, and then finding out how much we needed, going through who gets it, the vendors, all of that. So I do think that they do an admirable job, and I do think that adding eyes to it only will help enhance and improve what's already being done. So I just wanted that on the record, that we've had a very good experience just from the time I've been there. The audits, Governor, I want to thank you again for your suggestion of us through our agencies to do that. I did want to ask the team, I know that we got a couple of ours bumped for some of the other things, but I just wanted to see when you were going to go back again and do a few. I think we only had one or two left in the Secretary of State's office, but it's not only improved what we do internally, but I think it helps all of the administration looking at it, and the auditors as well. So I thank the team, and I thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Lieutenant Governor, any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Governor. And again, thank you for the good work and the solid work on this audit. I wanted to start off by making an observation and a recommendation, lay some foundation, then have some specific questions. And it really dovetails off of Mr. Cates' comments about the ITSPC. To me, the most important recommendation is this first recommendation that I'm going to just making the observation. I think it's too limiting in terms of its recommendation based on the audit itself. The recommendation just talks about including subject matter experts, but the audit itself talks about, as Mr. Cates had noted, a much more robust role for ITSPC to play in this process. As is noted, the ITSPC, the IT Strategic Planning Committee, only meets during the budget planning process every 2 years. And then on page 4, you make, a pretty, I think, important observation, where first off in the heading, you come to the conclusion, all tires need program review because they're not all getting it. And you note that the only tires that get a program review are those that are reviewed by the ITSPC during the course of the budget process. So if there's tires that are under $500,000, or if there are tires that are over $500,000 that are outside the budgetary period, those don't get program reviews. And then you note on page 2 what a program review includes, and it went to the very heart of what Mr. Cates has been saying, and that was, what's the rationale for the tire? What's the objective? What's the scope going to be? Are they aligned with the governor's goals and what's happening there? And what we're told in your audit is that's not happening, except every so often, every 2 years. And so that sort of lays the foundation then for my questions in terms of, okay, if the ITSP should play a more prominent role, if it should meet more often as you recommend, then during the budgetary period, just have some follow-up questions. First, I agree with that. It makes all the sense in the world. My first question for you is just for me to understand structurally what that ITSPC structure looks like. Because you say in your report it includes the executive branch department directors, who are all members of the governor's cabinet, and then the chief information officer. My question for you is, if you turn over to page 11 of the audit, it lays out the organizational chart of the EITS organization. But that's different than the ITSPC, correct? That's a different organization, right?
Lori Hoover, for the record, that's correct, it is different.
Okay, so then who are the executive branch directors? Are they all the directors of every executive branch of government, or within the executive branch of government? Are there selected directors who are on this ITSPC?
I think that's a question that Mr. Cates can probably answer since he's involved in that process.
For the record, Patrick Cates, the composition of the IT Strategic Planning Committee is, they're basically appointed by the governor. There's not a statute that requires a certain composition. It is not every state director. It's a sampling of agency directors. I'm on it. Director Wells has served on it this last session. NDOT, DHHS, corrections. Most of the big agencies serve on the committee. I can tell you I've been involved in the IT Strategic Planning Committee for over a decade, and prior to last session, my experience has been that certain agencies were nominated to participate, their directors were invited, and their directors delegated it to a deputy or an administrative services officer, and you had a little bit lower level of people there. This last time, we really reached out to those directors and asked them to personally participate, because the purpose of the committee was to make strategic decisions, and we didn't think that should be delegated. And I thought it went really well. There was a lot of conversation during those meetings about one agency proposing a project and another agency saying, hey, I already have something like that. Why don't you look at the stuff that we're using? But that's how, like I say, there's not a formal structure for it, but it's a sample of agency directors.
And that's very helpful to know that. And then, Mr. Katz, that's then those members of the executive branch who serve on that committee are appointed by the governor at some point. So he's the one who selects those. Okay. The reason I wanted to know that was the recommendation is to have the ITSPC meet more often. I don't know if we have a specific recommendation in terms of how often they should meet. And is there a way to measure that so when we come back and say, and we approve this, we know whether they're meeting more often or not and kind of define that. But then my second point was going to be, and I think you at least helped address that, and that is, just how busy are these directors? I mean, in my experience in the executive branch of government, those are some of the busiest people on the planet. And the recommendation is, let's get really super busy people to meet more often to solve this problem. And so I just wondered, did we get any input from these directors to say, yeah, I can handle a quarterly meeting, or I can handle a weekly meeting, or how often you're going to have them meet. But you've got, as members of this ITSPC, some of the busiest people in government who now are being asked to meet more often. So I'd like to have some comment in terms of just, is that doable? Is it practical to expect them to add one more thing to an already very busy government servant?
For the record, Warren Lohman, appreciate your comments, Lieutenant Governor. We did look at that, and that's one of the reasons that it's sort of a vague recommendation on meet more often, because we don't want to tie down these busy folks to, meeting quarterly or what have you, but more often than what they were doing within the budget cycle. And you're absolutely correct, they're very high level, very busy people, but we saw it as they're dealing with potentially lots of state dollars and lots of important decisions on the strategic direction of IT services in the state, and they're really, as we see it, the appropriate level of folks who should be involved in these sorts of decisions.
Thank you. That's helpful. Let me just ask this final point. Who decides? Who's the decision maker in terms of how often ITSPC meets?
For the record, Warren Lohman. Again, we would leave that to the Department of Administration and EATS, who are running that process and who have the tires and determining, can they wait for 3 months to meet or what have you. But leave that sort of flexibility up to the folks who are actually running the program.
Okay. I think those points and questions covered it, Governor. I would just recommend that on that first recommendation, we try to broaden that a little bit to include more than just TRA review, to include subject matter experts, really to sort of include this ITSPC robust involvement in the process, maybe so we can monitor that a little bit more and understand if we're actually making progress there. Because that seemed to be a key point that was made on these very important program reviews. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. All right, committee members, any further questions or comments? Any further presentation, Mr. Cates or from Audit? Good job. Thank you. I think this was very well done. So if there are no further questions or comments, the chair will accept a motion to approve and adopt the division's audit report for the Department of Administration, report number 17-04 is presented in agenda item number 4.
Excuse me, Governor, that's not an action item.
Oh, it's not.
Number 4, presentation of the audit report.
Well, then I withdraw that request. It is an information item, then we'll just move on if there are no further questions. I appreciate that. We'll move to agenda item number 5, which is the approval of the division's annual audit plan. Seems pretty straightforward. Thank you, Patrick. Board members, any questions or comments with regard to the audit plan? Mr. Controller and then the Attorney General.
Just one, Governor. The description on boards and commissions says administrative policy is the division and description. Can somebody elaborate on that and how it is we chose boards and commissions for administrative policy review?
Thank you, Mr. Controller. For the record, Steve Weinberger, Administrator. This is basically the result of 2 things. Hotline call that dealt with the issue of no controls or oversight over the compensation paid to administrative staff, executive directors and other administrative staff. And also AB 457 was just passed, signed into law, that actually has a clause in there that says certain boards and commissions must establish policies concerning compensation and reviewing staff performance. So with the combination of the hotline call we received and then the passing of this statute, I thought it would be a good idea to bump that up on my priority list.
Thank you, Mr. Weinberger. And what you're telling me is that part of the scope of this will be the review of the procedures for establishing such administrative positions and the compensation levels to see that they are consistent with the rest of state practice. Is that correct?
For the record, Steve Weinberger, we're definitely going to look at the procedures they set up, whether or not they're complying with them, and we do want to evaluate them too. As far as how far we'll go with the criteria, comparing them to our side, I guess, that's a thought. That's a possibility. There are also some other administrative procedures that are on their way. I think the Department of Administration is charged with developing those. I think those won't be effective until next January. And we're holding off, we're gonna give all these boards and commissions a little bit of time to absorb all the changes in statute and new regulations and take it from there.
I'll just say this. First of all, as the rest of today's agenda will emphasize, your charge is performance-oriented auditing, not so much pure compliance auditing, but there isn't a really sharp line between them, and sometimes when you do a performance audit, you come up with compliance and consistency issues, and I think this is a very timely, very useful, very important thing that we ought to be doing, precisely because this part of the administrative state seems to, at the state level as well as the federal level, want to become a law unto itself. So I enthusiastically support this. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Mr. Attorney General.
I would ask, I understand your reticence to comparing an executive director to, in some way, what people make on the state side. But I think it would be helpful to at least have a comparison of what all the executive directors are making in at least that universe, if we could do that.
For the record, Steve Weinberger, so you're comparing them to other boards and commissions too?
Exactly.
Along with agencies that are part of the Executive Branch Budget Act, correct? Is that?
I mean, I think the latter part is a bit apples and oranges, but I just think for me, I would certainly like to see executive director of one board versus executive director of other boards. And it may be X is a larger board and it does make sense, they make a lot of money, or it may turn out that one's a very tiny board and they make a lot of money. So I just think that'd be helpful for us to see. I would also ask, when you're checking executive directors, and I forget exactly your terminology of who you were checking, but will that include some of these outside counsel contracts and some of these larger folks that are brought into board that are sort of their staff for all essential purposes and providing major functions in the board and commission? Can it, if not?
It can. For the record, Steve Weinberger, yes.
I think that's helpful.
That would, I think we could consider that administrative policy, and that's why I kind of left it vague. And I know there's a statute dealing with that too, or I should say a bill that just passed. I think it was AB 328. So we definitely want to consider that too. It's a possibility.
Okay, and my last question would be, I noticed this one is estimated for December of 2018. For some of the reasons you mentioned, I do believe boards and commissions have been a fairly hot topic, certainly for some of our other boards. And I wonder if this group would be willing to try to reprioritize this to make that one come to date sooner rather than December 18.
For the record, Steve Weinberger, this is an action item, and possible action is for the committee to either request additional audits or revise the schedule.
I guess the question is, what's realistic? There's a lot that's going to go into this one. It's a pretty comprehensive audit. I think, if anything, I agree with the Attorney General, but I don't want to move it up too much so that there's not enough time to thoroughly vet this. I think the latest or the earliest that I would like to see is perhaps June of 2018, because then that will inform putting together the next budget for the next biennium.
Thank you, Governor. That's what I was thinking too. If we can move it up, we could try for June 2018.
Does that satisfy you, Mr. Attorney General?
I think that's great, and we could also take up moving another one of these down if you guys are over capacity.
And just to follow up on that, by expediting the presentation or the findings of the audit for the boards and commissions to June of 2018, will that alter the schedule on any of these ongoing audits?
I would say there's a good possibility of that. Off the top of my head, I'd have to really look into it deeper, but there is a chance of that. One thing to consider is if we do finish an audit before the scheduled audit committee meeting, we can release it early. So that's actually going to be the case with some of these, I think, specifically corrections with overtime. We're scheduling a meeting for October, but we're planning on actually finishing and releasing that audit sometime in August of this year. So with some of these other, actually including that audit, if we do finish them early, we'll release them as soon as we can.
The point being, I'm looking at your auditors, and they're the ones that have to do the work, and I don't want to oversubscribe them. So I guess I got to rely on you, Mr. Weinberger, in terms of your recommendation. Is if we're going to move up this boards and commissions audit to completion in June of 2018, do we need to push any of these others that are below to a later date?
For the record, Steve Weinberger, looking at the schedule, I mean, I can tell you the ones I definitely do not want to delay, and that would be obviously GoEd. And the corrections medical expenses, I think that's kind of a timely issue too. EATS, possibly, we might be able to delay that if we have to, and the education too. So I do think there's a good chance that may change our schedule. Right off the top of my head, though, I'd hate to predict which audits will be
Well,
delayed.
why don't we do this? Let's move the boards and commissions to June of 2018. We have time between now and October in our next meeting to have to be fully informed with regard to the progress of these other ongoing audits, and if we need to push one out further, we can do that. Is that reasonable?
For the record, Steve Weinberger, yes. So in October, you'll have a revised plan, and the plan will include boards and commissions being presented in June 2018 and any other changes I have to make.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from committee members on this agenda item? Mr. Controller.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Weinberger, can you give me a description of what you'll be doing in the Division of Environmental Protection, Conservation and Natural Resources Audit? What's the scope and purpose of that?
I discussed this with Mr. Weinberger. Since these are part of NRS 353A.049, these are audits that are being performed due to a telephone call. At this point in time, it's a little bit difficult for him to identify with too much particularity because he's trying to protect the identity by law of the person who made the referral. And I'd be happy to read that section to you if you would like me to.
I don't need to have it read. That's a helpful explanation. I didn't know whether this was a very broad or narrow audit. I guess at some point we'll discuss or we'll have an opportunity to discuss the broader issues beyond that phone call with this division. So I'm satisfied with that. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from committee members? If there are none, the chair will accept a motion to approve the division's annual audit plan with an amendment to change the estimated completion date for the boards and commissions audit to June of 2018.
Move to approve.
Second.
The Attorney General's moved for approval. Was that you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, trying to move his?
He calls the Secretary of State, so whoever you'd like, Governor.
No, I just seconded his motion.
I'll give it to the Secretary of State. Ladies first. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That motion passes unanimously. Let's move on to agenda item number 6, which is the approval of the division's audit policies and procedures desk manual. Mr. Weinberg.
Thank you, Governor. For the record, Steve Weinberger. Mr. Ozude is going to join me at the table. NRS 353A038 requires the committee to approve our policies and procedures regarding how we perform our audits. By statute 353A045, we're also required to follow the standards of the Institute of Internal Auditors. We modified our policies and procedures to incorporate recent changes that were released last January by this entity. We also made some changes as a result of our self-assessment we performed, which you can find in tab 7, and the independent validation of the self-assessment. All the additions are highlighted in blue, deletions are in red, and I can address any questions at this time.
Mr. Controller.
Thank you, Governor. I have a few minor questions. Mr. Weinberger, at page 2, at the bottom, the third line from the bottom, the internal audit must be free from interference in determining the scope of internal auditing. And my question is, interference by whom? At one level, you know, if you talk about interference by the governor, for example, it's my understanding that it's really his business as the state's chief executive and the executive over the audit to give some policy direction and guidance. I wouldn't consider that interference. Sounds to me like the problems that President Trump is having with certain of his direction, but who are we worried about interference from here?
Thank you, Mr. Controller. Steve Weinberger. Interference in this case applies to agencies and agency management. The governor, being the chief executive officer of the state, is actually the person that, per the standards of the Institute of Internal Auditors, we're supposed to report to. We have a dual reporting structure, which is what they recommend. We report to the committee, program-wise, and administratively to the governor's finance office, and eventually the governor, who, to use the terminology in the Institute of Internal Audit Standards, is the CEO.
I just wanted to clarify that for the record. At page 7, the last line in red says, additionally, the report should include, and that line has not got a strike through. Shouldn't that be in black, and that's part of the continuing text?
That's correct. It should be in black.
Okay.
Thank you.
And on page 8, the table, agency funding risk values for funding, has been struck, and I read that and read I read the entirety of this, but can you explain to me, with the striking of that table, how the audit plan and the risk issues will work? I think it would be helpful. My overall reaction is that what you've done here is cleaner, it represents the current process, and it doesn't attempt to microscopically dictate every detail, but it rather lays out a good plan. But I did want to understand that part in some.
Thank you, Mr. Controller. Steve Weinberger. You're correct. The reason I took this table out is because this table basically uses static risk values. You've got some increments here based on the dollar amounts of budget and general fund. And you can see there's just a 400, 275, those are the risk points, risk values. What I did was I changed those, so now the calculation of those is based on the percentage of their total budget for that group. For example, if there are 9 agencies who have a total budget that exceeds $250 million, and I add up the total budget of those 9 agencies and divide that by the total budget for the state, it comes out to say 80%, they get 80 points. So it's going to change every time. And in fact, I'll be doing a new schedule now that we have new budget numbers coming out. As soon as I have access to them, I'll go ahead and redo the schedule, and I'll present that to the committee in October. So that's the main reason I took this out, because although I'm pretty much using a lot of the same increments, the risk points will change based on the new budget amounts.
So if I understand correctly, by switching from absolute dollar amounts to percentage amounts and that sort of thing, relative measures, we still get essentially the same result, but we don't have to update the table every 2 years because basically the state budget is increased.
For the record, Steve Weinberger, that's correct.
Questions from other committee members? Ms. Cross.
For the record, Trudy Cross, when was the last time the manual was updated? Way before your time. Okay,
No,
that's enough.
Thank you, Steve Weinberger, for the record. Actually, when I first took over this position, I looked at this manual and requested a bunch of changes to it. It's really kind of a living document. The tough part is I can't really make changes without bringing it to the committee for approval, so I can't just change it anytime I want. But it's, I'm going to say, was it 2013? 2013 is the last time we changed it.
That's relevant.
So, and the standards actually haven't, the Institute of Internal Auditor standards, which was one of the main reasons we changed all this, actually haven't changed since then either. They came out with new standards in 2017.
Perfect. Okay, so in that light, I think it's good you took the table out myself. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cross. So, Mr. Weinberger, would you define these as model standards? These are pretty uniform throughout the country with regard to internal audits.
Thank you, Governor, for the question. Steve Weinberger. That's correct. The Institute of Internal Auditors is national. In fact, maybe even global. It's actually international. So yeah, these are standards that are supposed to be adopted by internal audit entities throughout the country.
Okay. And then, you may have said this already, but I just, for purposes of the record, what would you identify as the top 3 changes that we will see or notice versus what, let me put it this way, what do you think is important? What are we going to see different that we don't see now?
Well, to answer your question, Governor, I think a lot of these changes really have no effect on the way we operate. I think the most important parts of the internal audit standards are independence, where you are positioned within the entity, and having to use professional and due care when you do your work, and that's always been a factor of ours. So I don't foresee really any changes as a result of this.
All right. Mr. Lieutenant Governor, do you have any questions or comments?
I do. Thank you, Governor. Mr. Weinberg, just to have you turn, all my questions are really going to focus on the quality assurance and improvement program on pages, starting page 6. And let me just have you turn to page 7. I just wondered what this is Roman number 4, what the internal assessment looks like. You say this is once every 5 years. It sounds to me like, based on your description, you bring in a private CPA firm or otherwise a private auditor to come in and perform an external assessment once every 5 years. What does that look like? Are they sort of spot checking your audits? What does that look like?
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Steve Weinberger. Actually, an example of the internal assessment is in tab 7, and the standards require that you do that periodically. We have chosen to do that once every 2 years, and the standards also require what they call an independent validation of the reviews we do, the self-assessment we do, and that's actually on in tab 8, and that the standards have a specific time period that's once every 5 years. And you're correct, the requirements are it's got to be done by someone with so much experience in auditing. I don't know if a CPA is actually part of the requirement or not, but the person you hire has to have a minimum amount of experience in auditing. So for actual examples, they're right here. What we looked at are a lot of the administrative type things that are involved with finishing work papers, documenting all the little memos and stuff like that. And I guess we'll get to that in a more detailed discussion in those tabs. But that's basically it, like you said, spot checking. But none of these issues have anything to do with the accuracy of the report. Like it's just signing off at the bottom of all of your 350 work papers in a file, that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Let me have you look at the section 6 on that same page regarding quality assurance. And I think we touched on this a little bit already in some of your comments and some of the questions by the members of the committee. But you reference here that all the reports will indicate that the audit activities conform to the international standards for professional practice of internal auditing. I can only assume, as the governor said, that's a model, those are model standards, and more to the point, the purpose for those model standards is to allow people to have confidence in the conclusions that are being reached by these audits, because a standard set of internal auditing procedures and protocols that is widely accepted within the industry is being used when you conduct these audits. Is that all correct?
For the record, Steve Weinberger, that's exactly correct. That's the purpose behind these standards.
And I know that we want to follow these internal standards for that very purpose, for credibility, for trust, for confidence. In fact, we say on page 14 of the audit there, of the manual here, that when we go to quality assurance guidelines, and I'm looking at the very last paragraph on page 14. You're talking about the process of once there's been a cold read, it then goes on for Q&A for quality assurance. And the quality assurance review ensures that statements made in the report are done to ensure that the audit has been completed in compliance with not only the policies and procedures, but also these international standards for professional practice in internal auditing. So we say that, as we go through the quality assurance, one of the things we want to make sure is that these international standards are followed. And then if I could just skip ahead to tab 6, we're not there yet, but we talk about the charter in our next subject, but I just wanted to, for purposes of laying the foundation for my question, the charter itself says, in the new information that you're provided in that charter, the last paragraph on that first page, that the division will govern itself by adherence to the mandatory elements of these professional standards. And then that you actually are going to report to the director of the Governor's Office of Finance concerning compliance with those standards. So now that takes me back to page 7, and one of the changes that are being made here, and the reference again is section 6. The report for these internal audits are going to conform to these international standards, but then we say only if the results of the quality assurance and improvement program support such a statement. So I'm wondering, why would we qualify it that way? When, you know, I know that our goal is, and your goal is, and all our goals is to follow these standards so we can have the trust, the confidence, and the conclusion. But then we say, we're only gonna follow those, we're only gonna, I guess, certify, so to speak, that we conform with these standards only if the results of the quality assurance and improvement program support such a statement. Why would we qualify it that way?
Steve Weinberger for the record. So we really can't put that statement on our audit reports if we're not in compliance. And the 2 reviews that you see in this folder, I mean, there were some exceptions noted, but they concluded that we were in compliance. And I can give you a good example of, okay, it was a long time ago, but it was when we were during hard economic times, we could not afford to get the external validation performed. And we actually took that statement off our report because technically we were not in compliance with the standards of the Institute of Internal Auditors. So I think that's what it refers to. But as long as our self-assessments and our external validation do not find anything material enough to say that we're not in compliance, we will go ahead and confirm that.
Thank you, that's helpful. Mr. Weinberger, other than budgetary restrictions that surfaced in the past, can you think of a reason on a go-forward basis that the audits in the future would not be able to state that they are in conformity with the international standards referenced in this section?
Steve Weinberg for the record. I think that if you look at the standards, they're kind of similar to CPA standards too, to some respect, that you have to have certain elements present. As far as planning the audit, you have to ensure that you plan the audit properly. You have to supervise the audit. The staff that's actually doing their work is supervised, so they're looking at what they're supposed to look, gathering the evidence they're supposed to gather. And that's kind of the backbone of our policies and procedures. And as long as we follow that, I don't anticipate ever encountering a situation where I can't put that statement on the report.
Great. Your answers have been very helpful and informative to me, and I appreciate that clarification. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Any other questions or comments with regard to agenda item number 6? If there are none, the chair will accept a motion to approve the division's audit policies and procedures to the desk manual as presented in agenda item number 6.
So moved.
The controller has moved for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by the Lieutenant Governor. Any questions or comments on the motion? I hear none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That motion passes. And Mr. Lieutenant Governor, did the Secretary of State depart permanently?
She did. She had to leave to another commitment.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the minutes reflect that she wasn't part of that vote. Let's move on to agenda item number 7, which is the approval of the division's charter.
Thank you, Governor. Steve Weinberger, Administrator. We're presenting this basically for the same reasons we presented our policies. As a result of some of the new standards, we had to make some changes to the charter. And the internal audit standards require that the committee approve the internal audit charter. And as you can see, additions are highlighted in blue, deletions are in red, and I can address any questions.
Suppose what's our biggest takeaway for this, Mr. Weinberger?
The biggest change in the standards was that the Institute of Internal Auditors developed the core principles. And I think I have them with me. There are actually 10 of them. But they've always had these standards that were just basically like little administrative rules you have to follow. But then they developed 10 core principles, and these, if you follow the standards, you will be complying with the core principles. As far as the effect on us and our division, really nothing, but we're required to comply with the standards, and that's why I'm presenting this today.
No, and that's fine. As I said, I just want to make sure we have a record, but just out of curiosity, what is the #1 core principle?
I am so glad I looked these up the other day. Okay, number one is demonstrates integrity.
That's a good place to start, especially when you're doing auditing. Good. Any others that you would highlight?
Demonstrate, well, competence and due professional care, objective and free from undue influence. Mr. Controller kind of touched on that. And here's the one I actually mentioned, is appropriately positioned and adequately resourced. So we are appropriately positioned in this entity, according to the standards.
All right, questions or comments from board members on this agenda item? Mr. Attorney General.
I'm just going to move to approve.
Mr. Lieutenant Governor, any questions or comments?
Well, just my one comment is one that I had referenced in my prior questioning, Governor, but I think that this addition on page 1 is absolutely essential for in terms of the confidence level and the trust that we, as well as the citizens of Nevada, can have, that the division is going to govern itself with these mandatory provisions of these standards and practices that ensure that there is a high quality and a high level of confidence in these audits. And so I applaud the addition of this paragraph to the charter. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Before I take the motion, Mr. Weinberger, this is really small, but under purpose on page 1 of 6, there should be a period at the end of that sentence.
Thank you, sir. We'll correct that.
Again, when it gets done permanently, we don't want anyone to say they missed a period.
And actually, for the record, Steve Weinberger, Governor, this has to be signed, so after this is approved, I'll sign it. I will have Director Wells sign it, and we will forward it to you for your signature as the chair of the committee.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Attorney General.
Move to approve.
Attorney General has moved to approve the division's charter as presented in agenda item number 7. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Cross. Any questions or discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That motion passes 5-0. Okay, we have an information item for agenda item number 8, presentation of division self-assessment. Mr. Weinberger.
Thank you. For the record, Steve Weinberger. So we did kind of touch on this. This is a result of the requirement of the Institute of Internal Auditors, where we perform a periodic self-assessment. Our internal procedures require us to do this once every 2 years. And this one is for the period June 30, 2015. And I guess I can answer any questions if the committee has any.
Questions from committee members? Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Well, I just hate to ask any more questions and sort of pound this in the ground. But let me just follow up very quickly, Mr. Weinberg, if you don't mind. Page 7 on 19. It is our opinion that the division generally conforms. Is there a reason we say generally conforms?
That's correct. If actually, for the record, Steve Weinberger, if you look at page 5, those are the 3 definitions.
Right.
And generally conforms is the top one.
So we don't. So just so that's great. Matter of fact, I blew right past that definition, and I appreciate you pointing that out. But that means our division and what we're doing with our audits meets the highest standards, and generally conforms shouldn't concern me then.
For the record, Steve Weinberger, that's correct. We meet the standards as denoted by the Institute of Internal Auditors.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Any other questions or comments on this agenda item? We'll move to agenda item number 9, which is the presentation of division's self-assessment independent validation. Mr. Weinberger.
Thank you, Governor. For the record, Steve Weinberger. I touched on this too. The standards require once every 5 years that we have someone independent validate our self-assessment, and that's what this report is, and I can answer any questions.
This is the auditor of the audit of the audits.
That is correct.
I think if I got that right, but that's good to have a third party go through and make sure we're doing it well. Questions or comments from board members?
Governor,
Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
I think it's important, Mr. Weinberger, for you to just state on the record who Michael Colburn is and what his qualifications are to perform this work.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Michael Colburn is a CPA. He actually worked for our organization several years ago, and he works for the federal government right now in the capacity of internal audit. So he's got lots of experience and more than qualified for the requirements for performing this.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor.
Any other questions or comments on agenda item number 9? Agenda item, Mr. Controller.
Thank you, Governor. You said he now works for the federal government, but he also does private practice on the side, or do I understand correctly?
That's correct. And for the record, Steve Weinberger, he did have to clear this with his boss, basically.
Well, I think that's a good thing, but now we got that on the record, and thank you.
No, just to maybe follow up on Lieutenant Governor, it was just kind of the plainest letterhead that I've ever seen.
For the record, Steve Weinberger, I think this is what retired internal auditors do. There's a need there, and we have the ability to make some money off it. So.
Well, he's definitely saving money on his letterhead. So. All right. Agenda item number 10, I think committee member comments. Any comments? All right, public comment. Any public comment from Carson City? Any public comment from Las Vegas, Mr. Lieutenant Governor?
None here, Governor.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Controller is moved to adjourn. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by the Attorney General. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That motion passes unanimously. This meeting is adjourned. Everyone have a wonderful summer. Thank you.